Hi everyone, welcome to this offering of Crossroads, Compass and Circle, which is Ways of Becoming. And I'm excited to have you all here and to have this offering shared. So let us acknowledge country. Where you are, that might be called something different. Some of you live in Turtle Island and in Europe, and so that would be a different word we would use, I guess. But here in so-called Australia, we call it acknowledging country. And anyone can and should do it. And it is a way, as I understand it, of practicing and keeping in rhythm with ancient protocols of hospitality. So that when people who are not from a place or not traditional owners or custodians of that country cross into it, there can be an acknowledgement of that custodianship. And there can be a moment of consent too, maybe an explanation of what is happening right now in that country. Maybe there's news shared, and it's a way also for people who, settler people to really remember also the impacts of colonization that are continuing, and to reorient our focus to First Peoples and their continuing stewardship and their continuing leadership and their continuing activism and their continuing struggles to resist colonialism. So I invite you to bring your attention as fully as possible as you can to this acknowledgement. It's not just a thing we tick and do, so I want you to be here. Gather up your attention. This is a very serious step in a working, in a ritual, in a meeting, in general, throughout our days and nights. So I want to acknowledge that I am currently in Yagara, Jagara, and Turrbal country. I am in land that is unceded sovereign territory stolen by the British Empire and continuously occupied to this day. And I acknowledge that that occupation and invasion has been systemically and systematically violent and continues to be oppressive. I acknowledge the First Peoples of this place. I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge their pain and grief and loss, and I acknowledge their leadership, their activism, their science, their art, their family making, their kinship, their laughter, their tears, their stewardship, their food growing. I acknowledge their political organizing, their languages. I acknowledge survival and strength of all First Nations cultures and people. I acknowledge any First Nations person gathered here today. And I invite you all to do the same emotionally, magically, to acknowledge where you are. Maybe you know the names of the traditional peoples, of the First Peoples, of the place you're in. Maybe you're from there. So you acknowledge your kin, your aunties, your uncles, your elders. Or maybe you don't know the names of the people, and that's something for you to research, to look up. We also acknowledge the old ones, the creators, the spirits of place. I acknowledge Marawa, the great river, who is a guiding spirit of the place that I'm in. I acknowledge the surrounding mountains and the bay and Minjerribah. So just notice as you acknowledge also that we are acknowledging the more than human web as well. And in this dedication of attention, this dedication of awareness to this acknowledgement, may this continue throughout our work, throughout our days and our nights. Okay. So thank you very much for gathering, and we are going to begin with the program. Some of you will know that if you know my work or know me personally, that I'm very enthusiastic and uh, dedicated to the transmission and exploration and deepening of practice and lore. I'm very into technique, so I'll be offering some technique as well around crafting working spaces is how I think about it. I have a little bit of a problem with saying creating sacred space. I know that that can mean for some people the setting aside of a special, of a special time and a special place. I just don't think it's very helpful to modern Western techno-industrialist shaped minds to say those words, because words mean things and they affect our consciousness and they tell a story. So for me, I do not use that language. I'll just say that at the get-go. I often say, crafting working space or even creating ritual space, because all space is sacred all of the time. And I say that with the caveat of acknowledging that for some, the word sacred specifically means to set aside for a special purpose. And that's wonderful. Your mileage may vary. I'm just going to let you know my opinion there on that. I certainly don't think badly of people who say those words. For me, it's just a practice not to say that, and to remind myself that I'm always in sacred space. A lot of the technology, the ritual ethos of what I'm going to share today is about orienting to the land as it is. It's about also the ability sorcerously to weave power and attention and consciousness into certain signatures and shapes so that we can advantageously opportunistically create potent containers and compasses for our work. A lot of people here, I'm sure, and people listening to this will be super aware of the idea of a witch's circle. I'm going to go in a very particular order. We're going to go through a crossroads experience, and then a compass experience, and then a circle experience. When I teach about the circle, which means different things in different traditions and to different witches, and some witches don't really even work with a circle, that if we understand the cosmological mysteries, like intimately, emotionally, of the crossroads and the compass first, I think the circle makes much more sense after. A lot of people are taught about the circle, the witch's circle, as a container for the power we raise within. I believe that idea began to be articulated by Gerald Gardner in the 1950s. That seems to be when that idea was articulated and expressed in literature and in the witches' revival movement, right? So that may have been a folk teaching, but that specifically was maybe central to that New Forest area where that particular current comes from. However, there are other teachings as well, or there are other ideas that intermesh with that. So, it is said sometimes that a witch casts a circle to step between the worlds. So there's different people who will say that too. I believe also the Gardnerians say that sometimes as well. Certainly various witchcraft groups will really highlight that idea. Often in reclaiming witchcraft, when we seal our circle, we say we are now between the worlds. And what happens between the worlds changes all the worlds. So that's something that when I asked some of my elders in that tradition, like, why is that said? Even though I love the poetry and totally agree, they actually said, well, we say that because back in the day when we were gathering in the 70s with other witches, they would say, what happens between the worlds is not of the worlds. So that there was a different idea that, like, the political anarchistic kind of ecofeminist thinking of reclaiming witches was like, well, no, I want this magic to be practical and to affect the world that I live in, and to be, earth-centered. And so while these other more, I guess, maybe Western ceremonial influenced, I mean, we're all Western ceremonial influenced regardless of how much we centralize that, but these other ones who may have had that more of a more of an anchor and a tether. We're thinking that when you kind of etherically capsule yourself, this doesn't concern the worlds anymore. This is between the worlds. And I can understand where they're coming from. It's just not again, your mileage may vary, right? So there's so many perspectives, and we do magic for different reasons. When I'm working with the spirits and doing magic, I really want to practically affect the reality that I'm kind of in most of the time. So those are two things that are said about a witch's circle today and in the past like 60, 70 years, to step between the worlds and to contain the power we raise until we release it. So that idea, different writers, different teachers have talked about that, using the metaphor of a pot, like on the stove, where you have, you've got water in that pot. It cannot boil, it cannot be brought to boil unless it's in that container, unless it's in that pot. So that whole idea of raising energy or raising power or working with life force, and concentrating it needs that vessel and container in order to bring it to a boil. So that metaphor is often used. Another thing that is often said, which I kind of find curious, is that the circle protects us. Now there's kind of two main ideas. Because of course circles protect us. That is an ancient magical thing in many cultures. That is true. I'm not arguing with it. I find it interesting for these reasons. So one of those reasons is to protect us from like evil spirits. And so certainly Western ceremonial magical thinking, the magician circle is often stood in by the magician, who's conjuring and commanding demons and angels of various hierarchies into the triangle of art outside of the circle of art. That's a very like grimoire style, like Western grimoire style way of doing magic. Again, that works for some people, not my way. But that circle is totally protecting them against whatever they're conjuring, right? That's not so much the way I understand it as a witch. A witch can certainly do that kind of magic if they choose to. I feel like witch magic is more interested in erotically, intimately immersing ourselves in the spirit world. It's not so much about controlling or commanding necessarily. And so the other reason that I've heard more from witches is that it protects the space from like distracting energies, or like spirits who are attracted like moths to flame, I guess. This is true. I've experienced this, and it creates a boundary where they can't come in. So there's a whole range of ways of phrasing that. I've heard all kinds of ways of phrasing that. Personally, that's not really why I'm casting a circle. I can see that is an auxiliary function for some people. For some people, it's their main reason that they cast a circle, for protection. And what I think is actually going on there, I would argue that it's actually more about focus than protection, because when I'm going into ritual space, or if I'm crafting a working space, I'm also invoking, and I know that the spirits and ancestors and great ones and deities that I'm invoking will protect me. Like, I absolutely know that. And also, it is a common practice for many folk magicians and witches and spirit workers to bring amulets and talismans. Some of us even go so far, if this is relevant for us, to tattoo protection on our skin. So I have several tattoos and sigils of protection on my skin. They don't ever leave. They're in me now, right? And so I'm not so worried. Like, I'm not so worried about this idea that there are evil spirits lurking around corners that are going to get me. And that's not concerning to me. But I'm also not saying that there aren't beings and spirits who might wish me harm if I come across them. Of course there are. But I'm also not going to be paranoid about that. That's not a great way to be when working magic. And I know from experience and from relationship that the spirit helpers, my familiar spirits, my ancestors, my gods, that is a part of my workings, that I invoke them and ask them for aid, that they will protect me. I'm not so worried about needing a circle for that function. So when I was talking before about focus, I do think a circle provides focus. I believe that it was Victor Anderson who said this, that the circle is a lens. So it's like, imagine that it's the gods looking through, or the great ones looking through a microscope. It gives them a microscope. It's like the adjustment of a lens. So they have a microscope and they're like, oh, good, now we see you, and we get a telescope. So it's this like adjustment of a lens. We get to see more, and we get to perceive greater patterns and greater things. And the greater things get to be like, oh, there you are. Thanks for that. We've all tuned in. And I love that because it really highlights that witchcraft is spirit work, that it is ecstatic, intimate spirit work. And that we are, as witches, I believe, this is how I practice, trying to get the attention of really powerful forces, both within us and without us, to conspire and collaborate with us on certain ends. Maybe those ends are practical in this middle world to make change, to affect certain things. Maybe they're more celebratory and communionistic. But to have witness, to have that powerful sacred witnessing, both by our human peers and the other than human, more than human peers, who are mountain shaped and star shaped and flower shaped and fungi shaped. To have that, the circle provides that lensing, that focusing, and also that stepping, as I said before, between the worlds, so that we have privacy. A few weeks ago, I got a deeper understanding, like my understanding of the circle just continuously deepens through practicing. And the other day I was going to the bathroom, going to the toilet to pee, right? And I could have, like, no one else was in the house really, and I could have left the door open and just peed. But something in me, some mammalian response, some human primate thing in my brain went, no, shut the door, shut the door. And as I shut the door, I had this instant, like, maybe I'd been contemplating the circle earlier that day, but I had this instant realization that the casting of the circle and the sealing of the circle is also about privacy. I need to have a sense that that things that I don't want to see me cannot see me. And that's another function. And more what I'm concerned about is actually humans and human magicians. So more than these like non-human spirits, I'm more concerned that there might be humans who might intrude on my workings. And some of those humans would have the capacity and skill to intrude from afar, from a distance. And this is an ancient established idea in many cultures. And so to close the door like that is to kind of like etherically, astrally, whatever word works for you, seal it. And many of us, when we do circle work, when we create those circles, we do the seal. Some of us will have different ways of sealing it, but in different traditions, that's kind of emphasized in different ways. Some traditions, some of the more well-known, I guess, Western witchcraft traditions use a black-handled knife that comes from the Key of Solomon and Western Grimoire traditions, but not just there. In Greek folklore and Irish fairy faith, it is said that a black-handled iron knife put at the edge of your bed or on the windowsill if you're a birthing mother, you're about to give labor. Midwives in Scotland and Ireland would do that. They would put a black-handled knife on the windowsill, an iron knife, so that the good neighbors, the fairy people, would not come in and steal the child. And that's another important thing to remember that I'm going to bring up later, is that the more indigenous, local, kind of older fairy faith understandings have a not so lighthearted approach to the good neighbors. There's a really strong respect for them. There's also a healthy fear of them. And so a lot of this delineation, this black-handled knife, put it down, this iron knife, is just to say to them, hey, this is human business and we don't want you to intrude on our human business. But here's the boundary. In Greek sorcery and Greek folklore, people used black-handled knives to cut the wind, like sailors and people on ships will use it to stop the wind or cut the wind or change the wind. So that's also an interesting idea. And I wonder if that deeply folk established usage of black-handled knives got into the grimoire tradition somehow. And if you're unsure what I mean by the grimoire tradition, there's this long established kind of European studious learned magic of but men and women and people of other genders like practicing magic using books. using books that are past and they gather talismanic power, and they have very particular procedures in them. At the moment, there's been a revival of grimoire magic, and people are like studying the old grimoires, and that's fascinating. And I like kind of look peripherally and at the edge for interesting pieces, but that's not my area. I have many friends who are totally academically, scholarly, magically involved in that, and I think that's wonderful, and I love listening to them about it, but that's not me. But I will say sometimes I carry books of power into my ritual spaces as talismans, and I may read from them, but mainly they're there in an animistic way, power. So when I'm making up a space, like it might not be like a central working altar, but I might make shrines around my space. And this is establishing like a thoroughfare of power, right? Like sometimes when I'm starting to create my physical space or to curate and attend to it, I'm starting to like hype myself up and hype up the place and fill it out by placing items of power and fetishes of power and shrines. And some of us will do that at the directions or the cross-quarter directions. Some of us will have a central working altar. Sometimes logistically that doesn't work. But it can, some of us will have an altar in a certain direction if our tradition dictates that, or if we want to do that. But certainly none of this is necessary unless it is for you, or unless it is for the agreement you have with particular spirits, because that's also true as well in different traditions. So these are some of the pieces I wanted to just kind of get out of the way before we go into crossroads, compass, and circle. And at the end, if you have any questions, that's when I'll ask if people have questions. I might not have answers, but at least sometimes, offering a question, someone else might have something to say, or, it might just be nice even to ask the question into the air. So I'd ask you to reserve those questions until later. So the reason I start with crossroads is because people find it easier to find that crossroads anywhere. Crossroads have long been established as allies of witches. One of my favorite poetic ways of of thinking about the crossroads with witches is something that Raven Grimassi, who unfortunately died a few years ago, but who was a prolific writer in witchcraft and Italian sorcery, Italian folk magic, he talked about the company of crossroads. So this idea that witches and outcasts and kind of illegitimate people would gather at crossroads, and that the spirits of the crossroads would welcome them, specifically in the Italian context, Hecate and Diana, who have long been known to be witch goddesses. And both of them relate to the crossroads. Now, there's this classic kind of Hecate crossroads where there's a pole and 3 masks and 3 roads, which is super witchy. These 3 roads that meet at this strange location out in the desolate non-urban area, or the woods, or the valley. And then there are other crossroads we're probably familiar with in urban spaces where 2 roads cross, and then you have those kind of 4 roads coming out. I've seen 5 roads intersect and look like a pentagram or a starfish, which is really cool. I know that in various forms of Brazilian folk magic, different kinds of crossroads are gone to for different reasons. So a T section where this road makes this T symbol with another road, that's also technically a crossroads, and that's certainly worked with for certain magic in various Brazilian traditions, which you can kind of research if you're interested. Those would be, Kimbanda and Candomblé and Umbanda. Those are the names of those specifically Brazilian based, grown, syncretic traditions. So we begin with a crossroads too, because it doesn't rely on knowledge of where the directions are always, because the way that the crossroads can work is that you notice the left, you notice the right, you notice before, you notice behind, above, and below. And then we open the 7th, what I like to call the 7th secret direction, the center. And in various traditions, that's also called the center, which is the circumference. And so I'm going to lead us in an experience where we open the crossroads, and where you get to feel how that gathers up life force, how it concentrates your consciousness, and how it opens the gates of power. That's another important thing that it does. So that you could be walking down the street and do this, you know, and you can just do it like that. And also you can keep walking, because you wouldn't be walking through a boundary. You wouldn't be walking, you can carry the crossroads. You are the crossroads. So this is like a really marvelous way of opening to the spirit roads, opening to the ghost roads, and having that intersect and create power within your body, or to reveal and unfold power within your body. So I invite you to close your eyes or to take a soft gaze. And to notice your breath, to dedicate your awareness into, through, and as your breath. You might want to do some clearing around your body by making sound, by clicking, by clapping. Ha, ha, ha. You might want to move or stand if you can stand, or stretch. This is just to energize our focus, get ourselves into it. And now with your eyes open, if you will, let us ground with our eyes open. So looking around your space and just with your eyes open, if you can see in that way, just acknowledging what's around you, taking it in, opening, blessing all your senses to take in the information of where you are. This is also important if you're doing magic outside and you need to know you're safe, to survey the area. And I think this is a really underrated and important step. It reminds me also of that kind of mythic ancestry of witches gathering secretly and doing magic alone in the woods and needing to be a bit careful. So just checking around your space, any obstruction, any danger, just noticing. Obviously, you might be in a room and totally safe, and just noticing your space. Now, I invite you to feel, imagine, to sense, to remember, to know that you are implicitly connected to the land. And if it helps you, you can send down roots, send down tendrils of connection. Maybe you use sound as much as visualization, or maybe you're not a visualizer. Maybe you just sense and know and smell and see with thoughts. However you go that way, and let those thick as your thigh roots, tendrils drop and make love with the mycelial web, make love with the bacterial soil, make love, sending waves of love and blessing through the land. So often people might direct us to kind of dump our shit down there, and I'm not interested in that. Let's send waves of blessing, waves of love through the land. You might even sing or tone. And you might feel yourself becoming or remembering that you are a tree. So many stories of creation tell us that our human ancestors were trees. Maybe it's a memory that our ancient ancestors lived among and in trees. And I invite you to bring your attention up the landscape of this body, this being, out of the cauldron of your head, out of the crown of your skull, and swooping perhaps like branches or feathers or ferns or threads, expanding, flowering upwards, gathering in starfire and the dreaming wells between darkness, drinking in that incandescent light, that beautiful fecund darkness, that holy blackness. So as much as the powers of the earth and the below rise up and spiral through us, so do the powers of above and around spill down. You might like to place a hand on your belly and your heart, or maybe they go elsewhere. And feeling the above and the below meet, mix, mingle, marry. You might even like to incant that aloud with me. Meet, mix, mingle, marry. Meet, mix, mingle, marry. Meet, mix, mingle, marry. Feeling the meeting, the mixing, the mingling, the marrying. Those are words from the Wildwood tradition. Feel them coming into your heart. And in your heart, your four-chambered, precious, powerful, fragile, human, mammal, animal heart, feel your allies, feel your connections to your spirit helpers, your ancestors. Send a breath to your ancestors of blood. Send a breath to those ancestors of care who have cared and nourished you. Send a breath to the ancestors of the land. Remember, they are human and more than human, just as our ancestors of blood are. Send a breath to our mighty dead, the ancestors of magic, of spirit work, of priestessing, of hedge riding, of craft. And feel the ancestors gather like the company at the crossroads. We're going to start to open the crossroads. So with your eyes closed or open at your will, or alternating at your will, at your desire, I invite you to feel into the direction on your left. I don't need you to track where that is on the compass, because your body is a compass. So throwing your awareness out, maybe with gesture, with sound, with vision, throwing your awareness out to the road on your left. Imagine there's a road, a path, a track, an opening. Throw your awareness so far into that edgeless edge, into that infinite horizon on your left. Feeling, seeing, perhaps fragrance, color, memory, perhaps particular signs or spirits, and feeling that you, as much as you cast your attention out into the left, feel that road like a serpent dive into your guts. So as much as you throw your awareness out, it comes into you. And there might be a particular feature of the landscape that opens up to you on your left, anchors that for you. Now, crossing through the compass of body, throw your awareness out to the right. What's on your right? The road, the track on your right. Opening your attention to that, casting your awareness down the edgeless edge of the right, the infinite horizon on your right. What is anchoring you there? What comes up for you here? What opens to you here on the right? Feeling it dive into you as much as you dive into it. And feel the left and the right kissing inside of you. I invite you to throw your awareness before you, to the front of you. Send it on a breath, send it on a prayer, send it on a spell wind. Open the way before you. Open the way before. Feeling that come into you as much as you come into it. Cross the compass through what is behind you. Throw your awareness to the road behind. Remember, you can use sound, gesture, stillness, movement, prayer, song. What turns you on to your magic? And feel the before and the behind kissing inside of you. And then bringing your attention up and above. What is the road that spills and pours down from the zenith into you? So throwing your awareness up into the zenith as much as the zenith anchors inside of you. Does it feel like rain? Does it feel like lightning? Does it sing a song? Does it make a sound? Does it have a color, a texture, a fragrance? And then below, scooping up, allowing the below to anchor in as much as you open your awareness to the below. And then we're going to start up a spell with words. We're going to say by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below, by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below, by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below, by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below, by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below, by the left, by the right, by before, by behind, by above, by below. And feel your consciousness crystallize into a key or a key shape or a key image. Feel your consciousness crystallized as a key and see the gates of power, your power. See and feel them before you. Know that your key opens your gates of power. And when you're ready, press and feel that key into the keyhole and let the gates of power open through your body. And let yourself feel all your power at the crossroads by the center, which is the circumference. Feel the spirits, your spirits, gather at this crossroad. Feel whatever it is you're feeling. Whatever it is you're feeling. Take note of what you're seeing, of what you're perceiving, of what you're beholding. And find some way to ground that. Ground it in your bones, ground it with a gesture, ground it with a sound, knowing it's not going anywhere for now. We have just all availed ourselves of so much more awareness of life force, of the attention of the spirit world. You can invoke blessing here, you can invoke protection here, you can invoke assistance and witnessing here. And as you ground, maybe you'd like to make a few notes. If you have a journal or on your computer or on your device, there might be a few notes you want to make about how this was for you, what you noticed, what you felt, what you're feeling. So maybe just another minute for that, just recording, knowing, of course, that your body will remember and you can find ways to come back to that. This is this is my go-to way of opening after I ground and or align my souls, my cauldrons, which some of you will practice, or whatever your grounding, aligning practice is. Then I often open the crossroads like that. And the more we do it, of course, the more we can easily do it, the more we can easily, potently do it quickly. Left, right, before, behind, above, below, by the key that is, my consciousness, my cunning. The center is the circumference. Like you can just use, mnemonic device. You can use word incantations, spells, and to bring it up quickly, to bring yourself into that state quickly if you need to. We can, call in a lot of power, a lot of potency. You can get the attention of your spirits that way. If two people want to work together and do a lot of kind of maybe etheric healing work or some journeying work together, opening the crossroads together is a great idea, so that the roads are linked. So I'm going to transition now into the compass. So some of you familiar with, I guess, the dialogue or the rhetoric between, I guess, what is called in some parts of the world British traditional Wicca and then also what is sometimes called traditional witchcraft. There is often this kind of argument, debate. Is there really a difference between, the Wiccan circle, which I can't say much about other than published texts? I am not a Wiccan initiate, and the compass that is often referred to by different groups of witches who might be called traditional witches. So there's often a very kind of rhetorical, but also kind of there's a lot of tears and screaming spent over that. Sometimes I guess they could be the same, but the one thing that I've noticed I've never really seen written about very often in published Wiccan literature or emphasized, is that the compass, like when we really are working a compass, which I'll give one version of in a moment, is that it orients us to the sacred landscape, by which I mean that can happen through the cardinal directions and also the cross cardinal directions, but it's also not necessarily just about that. Like if you have a mountain that is your mountain in your landscape, then that, whatever direction that is, it might be north, northwest, that can become the anchor for your compass, right? And then you might track, where's the river, where's the cave, where's the volcano, where's the bay, where's this, where's that. A compass actually helps to situate ourselves in the land as it is, not to astrally curate a temple, which is a fine practice if that's what you want, but this is not what this is. And it helps us to actually navigate that. A compass is a compass, right? A compass is a directional navigational tool. And so that's also what it is when we're talking about a witch's compass. There are various books, like if you Googled witch's compass and you've never heard of that before, you would find essays and articles and books from entirely different perspectives. If you're not used to that language, there's an entire other world of witchcraft out there for you to find. And the witch's compass is such a marvelous way of working, because it really is not about, it doesn't live in this idea of this world and another world. It lives in the idea that everything is intermeshed, everything is here and now. And we can dissolve and sink into the inscape, or which is a word that I've heard Orion Fox would use, who is a traditional witch and a fairy worker. You can sink into the inscape, or you can orient and spin the compass around to work with that mountain, to work with that ocean, to work with that river mouth, to work with that lake. And this is grounding, situating, navigating ourselves in the terrain as it is. And it's also helping us become aware of the fact that land is so much more than what we can see and touch. There's numinous quality and depth to the land. And so a compass helps us do that. It helps us dissolve and sink into the into the underworld as well. A lot of traditional witchcraft is oriented to the underworld as the life giver, as the cauldron of all wisdom, as the beginning and end of things. And that's a really radical, and it's truly radical because the word radical means, of the root. It's a radical idea when so much spiritual tradition is constantly emphasizing above, 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 and even subconsciously people will look above when they think of deity and gesture above, and it's like, hey, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. Because the above is great, but we also need to remember that potentially we come from below, or to hold both, to hold the paradox of both. We are children of earth and starry heaven, as the Orphic tablet says. So, this idea of the compass helps ground, helps orient, helps navigate through the numinous terrain as it is. It's not even setting aside anything. In Robert Cochrane's tradition of witchcraft, which is called the clan of Tubal Kane, there's this idea that you actually kind of form a moat, like you kind of dig up. A lot of these workings are done outside or in caves. You actually kind of dig a little divot, like a moat, around you, and you fill it with certain liquids, so that when you cross it, like you might fill it with wine and different herbs, specifically red wine, you're crossing the river of blood. Now that comes up in a lot of folkloric fairy material from the British Isles and Ireland, this idea of the river of blood that we cross. It's mentioned in the story of Tam Lin, which is a Scottish ballad, that we cross and wade through the river of blood to get to fairy, to get to Elfame. And again, a lot of witches, that's what we want. Traditionally in Western and Northern Europe, witches were considered to be wed with, coupled with, in with the good neighbors. And the same kind of, like the old traditional ideas of what the fairies were doing, blasting the crops, stealing your children, souring your milk, are then also, this is what witches do because they are in league with fairies. And this is old stuff. And when I've asked my father, who lives in Bali, this is not an island really at all influenced by Christianity or Islam necessarily, even though of course Islam is to the left and the right of Bali. Bali is a Hindu island. When I've asked him about the local fairy faith, he's also told me that you have to be really careful of them. They call them jinn there. You have to be really careful of them. They can steal you, they can take you, they can make your cow sick. I'm like, how interesting. And when people who are scholars of this and who research this, they find the same stuff coming up everywhere. So witches have long been allied with these non-human forces. And so often we are desiring to go to be with them. Some of us even experience erotic relationship with them. I certainly do. And so some of us want to find, our allies in that kingdom, in that queendom, in those worlds, so we can work our sorcery together. And also just commune. Sometimes it's just for communion. So the compass helps to do that as well. And that's why, again, the compass, before we get to what is the circle really? And for me, the circle comes out of all of this. It comes out of understanding the crossroads. It comes out of understanding the compass. Once I understand those things, the circle is much more fulfilling for me. So with the compass, what we're going to do is take these hands, and I invite you just to rub your two hands together if you've got them. Rub those two hands. We're going to wake up the witch's eyes. There are witch's eyes in the center of our hands. So imagine, see, feel, remember, know that you have witch's eyes in the center of your hands. What do they look like in your mind's eye? What do you know them to be? Wake them up, wake them up. Imagine that you're seeing through your palms. Get your hands really warm, really activated. Open those witch's eyes in your hands, because we need to trick ourselves to feel something different. And press those hands down into your legs or into the floor or into the ground if you can. Press them down. And I really want you to saturate your attention with this feeling of pressing them down. and look through your hands, feel, smell, perceive through your hands. And feel how the pressing in, feel what presses back. As you press into your thighs, or you press into the floorboards, or you press into the ground or the dirt, what is pressing back? This is to help us get our sensitivity focused for this work, reminding us what we're doing. We're refining our senses. We're offering our awareness. We're sacrificing our awareness to something deeper, to the numinous, to the mystery. And I now want you to scan, I invite you to scan and survey the region you're in. If you cast your attention outwards, where is the hill, the mountain, the forest, the big tree, the cemetery, the graveyard is a place of power for witches, the river. Notice what's around you, scan around you. Say hello, greet these spirits, they're gods, they're guardians, greet them. You might be surprised at what you find. You might be able to track, oh, there's an underground river, there's an underground stream, I didn't know that before, and then you might be able to verify that later, but just allow that information to come through. And now I want or invite you to imagine and feel that you lay down, maybe you lay face down, but feel your back on the ground sinking into the land, or feel your face and your belly and your breast and your chest sinking into the land. If you're capable of it, or you want to do it, you can lay down on the ground, but it's just enough to feel it. And as you sink, 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 and merge, 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 now spin, spin, spin the compass, spiral the compass. Feel yourself spinning as a great star. And trust and know that the spirit roads, that the ley lines, that the song lines, that whatever your reference is, whatever your map is, trust that it will help deliver you to the right reference, to the right point as you spin and merge and spin and sink and spiral. You might find that your body is spiraling, rocking, as you hold this sensation of being face down or back down, merging with the soil. Maybe you feel it climb up around you and sinking into the great darkness, the great fecund, pregnant, powerful darkness. Merging with the fungi people, merging with the dirt people, the bacteria people, the worm people, the rhizome people. Feel how solid you feel and how flexible as well. Solid, grounded, anchored, yes, but also available to shape shifting. And let the compass point you to some part of the land that you need to listen to right now. Let the compass spin and spin. Let the arrow of your signature and your spirit spin and spin and spin until it stops. And then listen, open to perceive, open to listen. Where are you being pointed in the land? And just for now, I'd like you to return to your center. If you feel dissolved, you can recoalesce. You can coalesce, you can bring it back, and you can let the spinning stop. You can still your arrow. You can honor and thanks, and then breathe and bring yourself up through the soil. Take your time, do it excellently, do it thoroughly as best you can. Trust your body. Your body is the compass. And as you come back, you might need to stretch or yawn or get some water or tea or juice, or you might want to journal or draw for a couple of minutes or take notes. Okay. So thank you for trusting yourself and trusting me and doing this work. This is, in some cases, it might feel like an edge. So the compass looks many different ways. Like if we were together physically, I'd actually have us move anti-clockwise, and I'll explain why in a minute. And that would be regardless of the hemisphere. And I would have us moving, if we were capable, as if we had a bit of a lame leg. Now that so I wish I could demonstrate it, but it's like you go forward on one leg and you drag the other leg behind you. You go forward on one leg and you drag the other leg behind you. And you do this 9 times anti-clockwise around, and you're meant to conjure up this like visceral sensation of moving through like molasses or pushing a rock up a hill. And this is to kind of grind the mill of the witches and to spiral into the labyrinth of the land is how I like to put it. And this idea is from this the witch's god, the lamefoot god, the god who works in the forge, as a blacksmith. There's often a blacksmith aspect to the witch's god that I know, and they are moving their lame foot, and I mean that technically, literally, along, and we're invoking that kind of movement, moving through this molassesy air, pushing this stone up or down a hill where directions dissolve and become meaningless. The idea of moving what in the northern hemisphere would be called Widdershins, so like against the sun or to the north, is how that's considered. Here in the southern hemisphere, if you didn't already know, the sun the sun always appears to move. It always appears to move because it's the relationship to the sun and to our planet and the sun and how we tilt on the axis and rotate and also orbit. In the northern hemisphere, the sun rises in the east, goes through the south, sets in the west. Right? In the southern hemisphere, the sun rises in the east, goes through the north, sets in the west. Apparently, visually. And so in the southern hemisphere, when working certain circles, I will go with that Jeshel movement, because originally that would have just meant sunwise. And I'd go from the south, the direction of the midnight sun. The sun doesn't pass through the south in my hemisphere. I would go to the east where the sun rises. I'd go through the north where it is at its zenith. And then I would go into the west and back to the south. And obviously those who are doing that kind of Jeshel circle in the northern hemisphere would probably start in the north or the east. Different traditions say different things, and then go clockwise because your sun apparently goes clockwise because it goes through the south. Now in folklore, especially in Scotland and also in the West Country and southern England, there is this idea that the good people dance around the stone circles or dance on the grass where they leave mushrooms and darker shades of grass and things, that they always dance widdershins. Now, I have been told by a Scottish witch quite a long time ago that if you were on the moon, and this is true, if you are on the moon and looking at the earth turns anti-clockwise. And if this movement, this grinding, spiraling movement of the earth, that's her going inside herself. That's her making love to herself. And so these good neighbors, they're dancing because they want to sink down. They want to go into that luminous, hidden inscape, inner world, underworld, right? And so the witches follow. And so you'll find this understanding, certainly in Scottish witch trials and Scottish folklore, this turning to the left. Or for us in Australia, if we wanted to do that, we would be turning to the right. But different magic calls for different things. If I want to do a particularly like a boonful working, a blessing working, a working that's really about blessing, I would go with the sun, and this is where some of us would understand, like we go, oh yes, witchcraft 101. If I wanted to do destructive work or binding work or blasting work, I would go against the sun, right? But then I also have to consider the cultural context of things, because certainly there are also cultural truths living in this body. So there's also times that widdershins just means widdershins to me, and it has nothing to do with the sun. It has more to do with the movement of the planet, regardless of the sun. So you just have to, what I find with magic and magical rationale is you just have to have you just have to know what you're thinking and knowing what you're feeling. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I anchoring it to this? And then when you know, and that's your power source. That's what you're drawing upon. So that's why I would move to do a compass, because I am wanting to grind and spiral down into the land. So I want to go the way the earth is turning, right? I want to go that way. down into the land. So with this circle, now we're going to come to the circle. So we've experienced this like throwing open of the crossroads, but also that distillation, that concentration of the crossroads, the availing ourselves to more power and life force, and the perceptivity, the interperceptivity of spirits and our spirit. And then that feeling of sinking and orienting and navigating with the compass, because it's a compass. And all of this with the body, all of this, the body, I like to say the body is deeper, wilder, and wiser than we know. You know, the idea, I actually hold true that everything is body. You know, there's a lot of occult and esoteric and new age ideas that there's spirit and body. But body is something that I think that our mechanistic, techno-industrialist, Western capitalist world doesn't understand. Bodies change, bodies grow. There's more to bodies than what we see and what we're taught to see. And so this also incorporates trans experience and deeper understanding. And I think also helps to situate that understanding, because it's all there all of the time, changing and moving. And it also incorporates, you know, people who are bleeding and people who are giving birth, and that's all sacred, you know, and that this is our compass. So for me, what has been most helpful in my witchcraft, most helpful, is remembering that everything is body. Everything is body. Bodies eating bodies, dying bodies, killing bodies, eating bodies, dancing bodies, sleeping bodies. And sometimes I just rattle off, like I just start saying things like that, just to kind of alter myself into the depth of what body really is. And you'll notice I'm saying body, 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 not the body, not my body, not your body, because I don't want to objectify body, because I don't want to make body an object. You know, this one, this body, you know, that more intersubjectivity. And I do believe that that is a witch knowledge. You know, so much of, I think, witch cunning and witch magic is about body magic. You know, there's all this other stuff out there, which is great, and I've learned a great deal from, but it's not embodied and it's really abstract and really conceptual. And I'm more interested in feeling how my body and the body of a god, because gods have bodies, fuse. My body and the body of a fairy, my body and the body of a flower, my body and the body of an ocean, our bodies, our bodies, our bodies. That's what I'm interested in. And so my language, I have a really strong word sorcery practice around these things too. So there are certain things like, you know, one of those things is elements, which is a lot of modern witchcraft and pagan traditions will welcome and farewell the elements. You will never hear me doing that. And I just don't care for it. I don't think it makes cosmological sense to do. Like, obviously, if we're invoking an elemental spirit, very different. You know, if it's a sylph, it's a salamander, I do want to be able to say hello and goodbye. But it's very different if I'm just honoring the primal elements, which often I do in my reclaiming witchcraft practice. So if I'm honoring the primal elements as a part of honoring the circle of life, I'm not going to be saying hail and welcome air and hail and farewell air, because magically that makes no sense to me. The air is already there, I'm breathing, and I'm not saying goodbye to it, no fucking way. So in Australia, in many parts of so-called Australia, reclaiming communities have a different way of doing that. We say air is sacred. And we don't say hail and farewell air. You know, some of us do, but certainly I don't, and a portion of us don't. We'll say air is sacred again. And this constant reminder, air is sacred, fire is sacred, fire is sacred. Now, if I am working a circle and I'm conjuring a deity within that circle, or, you know, something with like, you know, that I do want to have that definitive kind of like, and now goodbye. Then of course, I might use that language, I might use something else. Often I say at the end of my rituals, peace, praise, and power. But that's because a lot of the beings that I'm calling, I'm married to, and I'm really not interested in saying goodbye. Like, I live my life with them. Some of you would have relationships like that, where you're wed to these goddesses. You're like, they're in you, they're of you. You know, you're with those spirits, those beings. That's, you know, and there's no hello or goodbye there at all. I think for some people's mental states and emotional states, it can be useful in group ritual, of course, to have that definition and that demarcation. I think that's very useful in big group ritual where you don't know everyone. And so you can say that hail and welcome Aphrodite and hail and farewell Aphrodite. but I encourage and urge people to remember that, not to rush that. And when we welcome, we're seducing our own senses to open to these constellations of consciousness, as Starhawk has written about deities. They're constellations of forces, she said. And then when we're farewelling them, it's like, let's farewell them properly, right? Like, we've invited them as honored guests. Let's work with them as honored guests. And this could be a being that we think of as a deity or a goddess. It could be something else entirely. On that note, I just need to plug my computer in. I'll be right back. So, feeling into the crossroads that you've opened that's still there. So maybe you conjure back that memory, that intentionality, that sensation, that image of the key, however that key feels or looks. And you feel the gates of power. And maybe you still feel how connected you are to the inscape of the land, to the numinous mystery of land, of body, bodies meeting bodies, dissolving bodies, eating bodies, birthing bodies. And feel how anchored you are. I think a proficiently cast circle is one that comes from anchoredness. And I now invite you to face the direction of the midnight sun. So for you in the northern hemisphere, it will be the north. For we in the southern hemisphere, it's the south. The direction the sun does not seem to pass through. So maybe you turn your entire body that way. So looking to the south. And maybe you make some gesture, maybe you send a breath, maybe you send a song, maybe you carve a pentagram. Some people will do that as a portal, but also as a seal. It opens the way, it allows certain power in, and also seals that direction. Do what you're used to doing at this midnight direction, this direction of darkness and power. Maybe you have certain words that you say at this direction. And I encourage you to imagine, as we're doing this, that you are stroking the horizon of the infinite, and that you are conjuring the edgeless edges of time and space to you. That you are saying, because you know the center is everywhere all of the time at once, that you can occupy the center, let the center occupy you, and you can get the attention of the infinite. So imagine that you have that command of your own potency, of your own brilliance, of your own magic. And then turning in the direction of the sun, either clockwise or anti-clockwise, turning to the direction of the east, of the rising sun. Gestures, sounds, and symbols, whatever works for you. Feel into that sun rising, that dawn fire, that breath. You might have certain relationships with certain elements at certain directions. That's okay. Maybe if that's really established for you, I encourage you to let that dissolve for now. Ooh, remembering to stroke the edgeless edges of time and space. Anchoring the center, which is everywhere all at once, but here and now. Turning to the direction of the south or the north, the direction of the sun at their zenith. Some of us are going into cooler times, some of us are going into warmer, lighter times. Feeling into, what's the sun doing? What angle is the sun at? Is the sun going to be going down? Is the sun going to be rising up in the arc? Gathering in the attention of the cosmos, gathering in. Turning to the west, all of us will now be turning to the west, bringing our attention to the west. the setting sun, the twilight place. In certain seasons, the sun does not set in the west. It will set maybe in the northwest, maybe in the southwest. So feeling that, where is the sun setting? Somewhere in the westerly direction. Maybe there's an ocean there for you. Maybe there's a vast ancient continent for you. Maybe there's a mountain range, a valley. Maybe that's your half direction. And then bring it back to where you began. Don't leave it kind of half open or a quarter open. Bring it back to that place, that south or north place, and seal it there. Feel the circle complete. Feel the Ouroboros eating their own tail, that snake who devours her tail. I love that particular image. And then, just like with the crossroads, and we've got this from the crossroads, above us, feeling the stars and the breath of darkness help you, feeling the above help you. Remember that the above is also the below. You can trick yourself into another world this way. This is the witch's trick. That which is above is that which is below. That which is below is that which is above. The branches are the roots are the branches, and below us, maybe you gesture, maybe you bring your attention with sound or visualization to below. Let this sphere encase below you. Let this sphere seal and close below you. And then by the center, which is the circumference, again, that crossroads idea. By the center, which is the circumference. 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 The circle is cast. We are between the worlds in all the worlds. And what happens between the worlds changes all the worlds. So you might like to let those words reverberate for you. What happens between the worlds changes all the worlds. Or maybe it's more by the center, which is the circumference. And notice like the distinction of doing all of that lead up work to now how the circle feels. It might not feel different to you at all, but I just would like you to notice what has opening the crossroads and moving a compass or becoming a compass. What has that done for the circle? So just feeling into the circle, into the sphere. What do you notice about the structural integrity, about your own perceptivity, about your own consciousness, the tone, the quality, the shapes of your consciousness? And what is the circle now for you? Really feel like, what is this circle doing? Does it focus you? Does it offer a lens? Does it put you between the worlds? If you raised power, would it hold the power? So just noticing, what is this circle right now? And so we have some time for some questions or queries or clarifications. So a reminder that this is being recorded. So you can, if you would prefer, write your questions into the chat box. Or if you feel like unmuting and asking a question, now is that time. Again, I might not have an answer.
Hi, Theo. Thank you so much for that beautiful journey and all of your information and promotion and explanation. I really appreciate that. So just as a starting point. My question comes to reference something that you were talking about before, which is about invoking the crossroads whenever and wherever. And I was wondering if you had some examples that you could give of a space or a time that you might unconventionally open the crossroads.
Yeah, look, I've opened them on planes, on trains, and automobiles. That's all true, by the way. But I use that example because it's funny. Yes, so sometimes like when I'm in a car, I don't drive, so I'm always the passenger when I'm in a car. I can often use that time, if it's a long drive in particular, and the driver's pretty alert and pretty fine, I can use that time to travel. And I open the crossroads while the car is moving, and I've got this momentum of movement, and I'm also opened and able to like spirit fly really well. So I often open the crossroads before I fly. Because it also anchors me, which makes me super, I guess, super alert, super alive, and also makes my flight, my journeying more lucid. So that's something that I do. Sometimes I open a crossroads and I anchor it into like the pelvic bowl before a meeting that I need extra sensitivity for, and maybe access to oracular information. So sometimes I open a crossroads really quickly before a reading or a healing I'm doing, that kind of thing. Yeah. So there's a
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. There's a question here. Let me just, it says, early in the presentation, you said 4 words several times. Yeah, yeah. So in the Wildwood tradition of witchcraft, which I work very deeply within, we often will say when we're grounding, to meet, to mix, to mingle, to marry. Those words are often used, especially when we get to the heart place. You know, we often, priestesses and initiates of that tradition will often use that language, and it's become kind of a mnemonic spell, like to meet, to mix, to mingle, to marry. And it's great to chant those words over and over and over again. They also raise power, so you can use them for that too. Are there any other questions or needs for clarification?
I have a question, Theo. I was just wondering, when I cast circle, very much along what you were saying around, for me, it's about focus and intent. It's not shutting out. It's not protection.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's about my focus. Sometimes when I've worked collectively with Indigenous elders around this, they are quite uncomfortable with the idea of circle and feel like this is shutting out country or shutting out ancestors. So circle has been something I've been asked not to do. So when we work together, so it's been like, yes, do blessings, do work in other ways, but not circle. And I'm curious if you've had any experiences in that way. I know there's Wildwood Indigenous community witches as well that work in that space, and I'm curious because I've when I've explained that, very much it's been this is very much a focus of intention and blessing, not intended to exclude country in any way. I'm wondering whether you've had experiences in that sense from First Nations community.
Yeah, it's more individual, like First Nations individuals, and I can't really accurately speak for them, of course, but I know that one of my beloveds who works in 2 of the traditions that I work in, both Wildwood and Reclaiming, I know that she doesn't think about a circle that way, but also she's also familiar with the ins and outs of witchcraft. So as well as her culture, right? So I guess maybe there's the idea of a circle, like yeah, we're using a particular word, aren't we? And it does like I guess, in so many of us here in this room probably are inspired by, British and Irish and Scottish and Welsh folklore and legends and stories. And the circle in that is so clear, right? There's all of the circles. Here, there are circles in the land, but I think obviously it's so different. and for me, it's not cutting out country, but if I was working with elders like you, I would just be like, oh, there's so many other options. There's so many other options.
Yeah, and I've just been flexible in that space, and I don't have to do things a certain way in order to work together. Yeah.
Something that I've done is when I've had those experiences, I've blessed the directions. Not cast a circle. So I'll go to each direction and I will offer sound and blessing to each direction, and bring people's attention to what is in that direction for you. Sing to that, be silent to that, listen to that. And that seems to work across many cultures.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question, because it is true that we, I think, need to adjust sometimes when there is a better priority.
Yes.
And when if we were being maybe trying to over-explain ourselves, or trying to maybe even stubbornly stick to our traditions, it's like, well, actually, whose land am I on? And who am I listening to right now? Because in the privacy of my own space, I can do that respectfully and understand what I'm doing. As you know, Jodie, I know. But then if I'm with other people who have a lot of authority, and who have authority in the context of the country I'm in, then I'm going to just leave all my shit behind and try my best to just do what's proper here.
Yeah, and by listening and stepping outside of what you know, you learn a lot more.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that question. Randy, did you have a question?
I was just along the lines of what you were talking about. I had the privilege of being in Costa Rica in the end of 2018 into a little beginning of 2019. And I was on a yoga retreat, and we went to a jungle eco lodge, like right on the water of an area of the country called the Osa Peninsula. And I realized that there was so little that I knew about that country, and it's very similar to what happened on Turtle Island. The indigenous people are relegated to, they don't call them reservations, they call them like special land or something. And I got to talk with an elder, and it's very similar that he said that they honor the directions and they call them the spirits, but they don't, the idea of a circle was something very, very foreign to him. He didn't really understand like what the purpose of that was. Yeah. Because it's similar to what you said, that all land is sacred. All land is everything is sacred. Like all the land is sacred. So.
Yeah, so for me, my emphasis when I'm working with a circle is so different, because, in the beginning when I was basically saying, well, I don't say create sacred space because it is, with that caveat that I gave. And for me, a circle, like I always remember this, that not everyone is a witch or a witch type person, by which I mean, like I think of witches as specialist spirit workers, and so not everyone in a society is a witch or a spirit worker or a priestess or an oracle. So the spirit workers, the hedge riders, the priestesses, the witches of certain societies will have certain workings that are specific to us. So there's the idea of the magic circle. It does turn up in various non-European cultures as well, a little differently, but it's there. And to have the ability to step inside of one and to conjure and to work and to call is much more of a spirit worker thing. And even in societies that respect those spirit workers, there's still a bit of fear about those workings. And so I don't know a lot about the spirit workers of the vast countries that I'm around in so-called Australia, but I do know that their workings are hidden, and that their workings are maybe sometimes even disorienting to other members of their society, and that it's not talked about a lot. So again, I come back to that privacy, which I think when we're working as witches in like, what blah 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 blah, when we're working as witches, I feel like we're looking for privacy and focus, and we're trying to step between the worlds, and that thing about intentionality. And I don't think it's about making a space sacred, other than to set it apart for a moment. But if I'm with other people and it's a different situation, I'm probably not going to cast a circle, because that's a witch thing, as I understand it, right? So even if I'm with other pagans who aren't witches, I'm like, well, I wonder if this is relevant to them, because, depending on how we do it. So maybe it's more relevant. Like, I know a lot of modern druid groups do this. They just bless the directions.
Yes.
And I know that different First Nations communities and societies in Turtle Island do that too. I know the Aztec dancers have a marvelous way, a powerful, colorful, musical way. I'm so glad I've seen it, to honor the directions and to bless the directions. I also think blessing the directions is a very powerful thing to do. So I think I encourage us to think really carefully about, why am I casting a circle? And I cast circles, and what for? And then if I'm, and in what context would I just go, no, that's not appropriate, either because it makes no sense to this situation, or there's no context for it here. Yeah. And there's so many ways to acknowledge the inherent sanctity of land. There's so many ways also to call for witnessing. And one of my favorite ways is more of that compass thing, which you can do internally. You can sync, you can spread, you can let the arrow of your spirit direct you to where you need to focus. And like, if you're in ceremony or in a meeting, you can kind of do that quietly and then be like, oh, okay, so that fig tree, I'm at that fig tree, and that fig tree is telling me this, and that's important for this meeting, that kind of thing. We're almost out of time. Actually, we're over time. So I'm wondering if there's like at least one more question I could quickly give something to. Oh, there is down here. Thank you. In your presentation, you mentioned that with opening the crossroads, we can carry that with us in motion. Is there a time where one can do something to similar effect with a circle? Totally there is. I have done it. I know people on this call have done it. But with a circle, I always feel like I actually have to anchor it into something physical on my body. So what I've done is I've anchored the circle into a ring or a necklace. I remember a few years ago during my Saturn return, when it was very intense and I was going through a lot of stuff, I had to have a circle around me for 5 days. And so I did it. I put it in a necklace. I didn't take that necklace off. And I just felt so at ease. Like the fact that the center of the circle was anchored in the necklace. And I was so like focused and lensed. And I was able to bring in help when I needed to, really seamlessly. And if I needed to, because I was going through some reactivated trauma, if I needed to, I could step between the worlds and get refuge and come back. And it was all very contained, which the circle can do. It brings that structural integrity with it, brings that like powerful witch's architecture. So like I had that, and you can do it that way, absolutely. Sometimes I've, when working with initiates, I've asked them to walk with a circle. And really that's to blend that understanding that a well-cast circle draws upon an opened crossroads anyway. Like so much of how I'm thinking about a circle is so dependent upon the idea of left, right, before, behind, above, below. It's so dependent upon that idea. And sometimes we'll substitute like north, south, west, east, above, below for that. But that's how I've done that before. So let us release our circles, and let's do that now. So if you're unfamiliar with that, we would just go almost in reverse order. So bringing your attention back, and maybe you say by the center, which is the circumference, and you take a breath into that and you feel the mystery of that, because it is a mystery that's kind of ineffable and wordless. By the center, which is the circumference. And then gather up the cloak of magic below you and gather in, like it's like we're drawing it back in, we're concentrating it back in, drawing back in what you cast above you, and then go in that opposite direction. So some of us would now go clockwise and some of us would now go anti-clockwise. And so we're gathering in these tendrils, these threads from the direction of darkness, from the direction of twilight, from the direction of the sun at the midday point, from the direction of dawn's breath, dawn's awakening in the east, back to the south or the north. And we honor that. And I like to clap my hands because it can release etheric tension. And then I say, if the land should need it, may the land take it. You know, and that gives the, you know, if the land wants it, the land can have it. So you might say something like that, so that if the land that you cast the circle upon, that you drew this essence from, wants this for some reason, then it's the land's business. And I like to put my hands in the ground and give a blessing because, you know, I've seen so many times when people open circles and everything's just done and there's no honoring of the land again. So let's end again, quietly, silently, with the spirits of the land, with the ancestors of the land, with the people who steward and are the traditional peoples of the land. Bring your attention back to that. Offer a blessing from your hands, from your heart. And another prayer I say, because sometimes witch magic can get spirits really giddy and drunk, and so I say this to soothe an area so that a person walking through it is like, oh, I'm fine. I say, may the rivers know their flow, as from this place we witches go. May the rivers know their flow, as from this place we witches go. May the rivers know their flow, as from this place we witches go. And that just eases everything out so that some unsuspecting person walking through it isn't zapped, isn't like nauseous, because that can happen, I've seen it. And we just settle, we ground, we take care of ourselves. Thank you so much for participating in this and also giving me the gravitas to do this so that I can then offer it and put it on YouTube as a resource, you know? So thank you so much. Blessings to your days and your nights and your upcoming equinoxes. I hope all is well. Mwah.